friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time, and I'm here today to share with you my newest recipe on what a lot of people call elderberry syrup, but I don't call it that because though it does have elderberries in it, it has a whole bunch of other stuff too. And I had a recipe I did several years ago, but since then I've started collecting and growing some new herbs that I've added to it as well to really give it even more immune boosting properties and healing properties. So the purpose of this is it's just one of our cold and flu prevention / remedies. Now, it doesn't guarantee it's going to work for you. It's just what we do. It's one of the many. So I do have a few videos out there on natural antivirals and immune boosters and some of the various things we do to help boost our immunity and prevent getting ill. And on those very rare occasions that we've gotten ill, which has been, I don't know when, it's been many years. But if we do, this is what we would take. But mostly what we use it for right now is just a preventative measure. Before I get into the actual recipe, let me make sure that you understand the importance of knowing what your body can handle, what you're allergic to, if you're on medications, and if any of these herbs that I'm using in this recipe may cause problems with medications or allergies or any other underlying health conditions you may have. And then I also want you to understand that any of these measurements or herbs or spices that I'm using, you can either use more of, less of, or eliminate them altogether. That's the whole idea of me doing videos like this and sharing. It's just what I'm doing. It doesn't mean you have to do it exactly the same way. You can just use some of these ideas and mix them up in a way that suits you best. Okay, so let's get started. I wanted to have 8 cups of the final product. So working off of that, you can either half this recipe or double it according to how much you want to make at a time. And I started with 1 whole cup of dried black elderberry, so that's the Sambucus nigra, and I'm putting all that stuff into my stainless steel pot. I added a ½ cup of marshmallow root. Now the difference was in my last recipe, I was using the leaves and the flowers because at the time I hadn't got to the point where I was starting to collect the root from my marshmallow plants, but the root is going to be more powerful and have more properties to help soothe a sore throat and a cough. So I added a ½ cup of the root, and then I put the ½ cup of the astragalus root. Then I used about, when it came to the cinnamon sticks, I used about 5 to 6, and do make sure, by the way, that this is the Ceylon cinnamon, especially for this case, because you're trying to make a good strong brew. I don't recommend using cassia cinnamon sticks in this, and that's going to be any of your ones that are labeled as Saigon, Vietnamese, and so on. You're looking for the Ceylon cinnamon sticks. And then I used about a ½ cup of the dried ginger pieces here. And I also put in 1 heaping tablespoon of the whole cloves. And then the last thing I added to the pot in the first stage is about 10 of the star anise. So star anise, just so you know, the ingredient in this is one of the ones that's been synthesized. Why they keep synthesizing things other than to make it cheaper, but it makes it less healthy, and that's what they use in Tamiflu. So why not go with the more natural source and get it straight from the star anise, which, by the way, if you're unfamiliar with that, has a very strong licorice flavor, a much better tasting licorice flavor and stronger than what you actually find in your licorice root. So then to that I added a little better than 8 cups of water. I then brought all of that to a boil, just the way it was, no added sugar or honey at this point. And once I got to a full boil, I then turned the heat down, put the lid on, because you want to hold in as much moisture as you can, and I let it simmer for at least 45 minutes. You can go up to an hour. You can let it simmer for as long as you want. If you want to keep condensing it down and make it a thick syrup, you can take the lid off and just let it keep cooking down to where it's maybe half the amount of liquid than what you put in there. And then after I had got it really well simmered and ended up with a pretty dark mixture, I then removed it from the heat entirely and then added my more delicate herbs. So when you're talking things like the berries and the roots and the cinnamon, which is a bark, these are woody things, hard things that you can actually simmer for a long time, and what you're doing is you're making a decoction out of them. But when you're talking about your greens and flowers, anything like the horehound, I've got the dried herb itself, it's not a root, then it's going to be more delicate, and it's really not a good idea to simmer it for such a long time because you're more likely to destroy the properties in that. So that's when, at that point, I added a half cup of my dried echinacea leaves and even flower petals, a half cup of the elder flowers that I collected before the berries started coming on, because I always end up with a lot more flowers than I do berries. And the flowers are just about as medicinal, if not as medicinal, as your berries. So I decided this time I was going to use both the flowers and the berries. So a half cup of the dried flowers and then a half cup of the horehound. Now this is one you may want to consider cutting back on. Horehound is one of those that's good for sore throats and coughs, but also is good as an expectorant to help loosen up mucus, but it can be very bitter. I did add a half cup. I was worried it would be too bitter, but my final product ended up not too bad. It is a little bitter, but it's definitely tolerable. So you might want to cut that back to a quarter cup. So anyway, I add those dried herbs in there, I stirred it around, and then let them sit and cool down quite a bit. You at least want it cool enough that it's easy enough to handle when you go to strain it out. So I used my mesh stainless steel strainer over my 8-cup batter bowl and then just poured it all through that and then just let it sit and drain for quite some time. Now the nice thing about using the whole herbs like the star anise and the cinnamon sticks rather than using it in powdered, it's so much easier to strain out. If though, like you did, followed my previous recipe where I used mostly powders in that, what I recommend doing is laying a piece of cheesecloth or any kind of finely woven cotton, it's got to be natural cloth, over that your strainer, whatever type of strainer you're using, and then strain it through there so you don't end up with so much sludge in your final product, because that's what we ended up with, was a lot of sludge at the bottom at the last time I made it, where I forgot to strain it through a cloth. That's why I decided to go with the whole herbs, and it did make it much cleaner and quicker and easier to strain out. And then I just composted the material. The chickens will go through and eat all the stuff out of there that they like that will still be healthy for them, and then the things like they won't eat, like the cloves and the cinnamon, throwing that stuff out in your garden will also help prevent pests anyway. So just toss it out there, and I just toss it all right into the garden areas. Now, one option I forgot to say earlier is that you might want, if you like things really spicy, consider adding anywhere from a tablespoon to a quarter cup of some red pepper flakes to get a little more vitamin C and a little more of the healing properties of those. I really wanted to do that this time, but decided not to, because a lot of times I'm sharing this with family members and not all of them like it quite that spicy. They can't handle the heat. So I decided to leave that out. So I ended up with only about 6 cups left of the liquid. And that was when I went ahead and added in the honey. So what I used was 2 cups of raw honey. And the reason I waited until it was at room temperature before adding the honey was to keep it raw. This is very important for several reasons. Not only is it going to have far more benefits at helping to fight and prevent colds and flus, it's also going to help preserve this syrup that you're going to end up with for a much longer period of time. In fact, Patrick and I just finally finished up the syrup I made 3 years ago. No, it's actually been 4 years ago that I made it, and it was still good. Now, I do still keep it in the fridge. However, the honey itself will preserve it. Now, for children, when you're giving it to them, like when they're ill, I recommend about a tablespoon tops for children. And I can't give ages. I'm not a doctor. I'm not licensed in any healthcare. I'm just throwing out a rough idea. So then dosages for adults, if you're looking at preventative care and you're just wanting to take it on a regular basis because you know people around you are getting sick and there's a lot of stuff going around, I recommend about a tablespoon a day. Or you can take 2 tablespoons a day. If you do that, I recommend taking 1 in the morning and 1 in the evening. And then if you feel sick, then I recommend taking about 2 tablespoons, which is usually your standard dose of any other kind of cough, cold, flu medicine that you're going to buy over the counter. I would say 1 to 2 times a day, depending on how much you feel you need it. Maybe even 3 times a day if you're really kind of wanting to knock something out. Also remember, and this is what I'm more prone to do, when it comes to trying to prevent illness or even if we do get sick trying to cure an illness, that's something I like to switch up. So again, going back to that video I have on natural antivirals and immune boosters, there's things you can do like the honey infused garlic, herbal teas. I have recipes for that can help with that. And I like to mix things up rather than sticking with just one thing all the time, because I think that's going to work better for your system. You're less likely to overdo it on one thing. You're just getting a more variety, which is going to be better for you anyway. Because personally, I wouldn't want to add garlic to this, but garlic is an excellent thing, especially when it's in its raw form, especially when it's infused with honey, especially when you can add things like hot peppers and black seed and other goodies to it like that. So that's it for the recipe. I'll be writing all the ingredients in the description box down below, and I'll also be linking to several other videos, whatever else I think will be very helpful in helping you to compile some different ideas to help boost your immune system and to also help you recover quicker from whatever illness you may end up with. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and share your thoughts down below. What kind of ingredients do you like to add to your syrups or your cold and flu medicines? What are your favorite types of immune boosters you like to use? Do you prefer the honey infused garlic or the fire cider or your syrups like this? Whatever it is, go ahead and share your ideas down below, because everybody needs all kinds of different ideas that are going to help them take better care of their own immune system instead of having to depend on certain big highly paid corporations to do it for them. All right, well, thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.